August 19th, 1944. Wehrmacht Headquarters, East Prussia. General Oberst Alfred Jodl studied the newest intelligence reports from the collapsing Western Front. His staff had done the math on the Allied supply line stretching more than 400 miles from the Normandy beaches to Patton's fast-moving Third Army. The Americans had pushed too far. Patton would have to stop soon, maybe in days, maybe in hours. No army could keep moving at that speed without fuel. From his post at Hitler's Wolfschanz headquarters, Jodl saw what every German general already knew from experience. An armored division used roughly 150,000 gallons of fuel each day when advancing. The Americans were now about 400 miles from their supply depots. The conclusion seemed obvious. Patton's Third Army would run out of fuel, giving the Wehrmacht enough time to regroup at the Seine and maybe hold the line until winter. What Jodl didn't realize was that 125 miles away, nearly 6,000 trucks were already rolling east in a non-stop convoy, headlights on despite normal military rules, carrying over 12,000 tons of supplies every single day. The Red Ball Express, an operation so bold that German planners never imagined it, was about to break every belief the Germans held about modern mechanized war. In just 72 hours, Patton's out-of-gas tanks would smash into German positions at the Seine. Within a week, they would enter Paris. Within a month, they would reach the German border. The Wehrmacht's top officers were about to learn a harsh lesson in American logistics, and it would be delivered by 23,000 truck drivers, three-quarters of them African-American, who turned a one-way highway system into the most efficient supply line in military history. The German General Staff's faith in an American supply collapse came from decades of military experience and their own recent setbacks. The Wehrmacht had invented blitzkrieg, reshaped modern warfare, and understood how logistics controlled everything. Their campaigns had often stalled simply because supplies couldn't keep up with their victories. In Russia, their advance had slowed not just because of Soviet resistance, but because they simply couldn't supply their troops over such huge distances. Trucks failed on Russian roads. Horse-drawn wagons, still 80% of German transport, couldn't match tank advances. And because the railways used different gauges, supplies piled up far from front. Panzer officer Heinrich von Luttwitz, who would later command the 47th Panzer Corps, wrote in July, "The Americans faced the same kind of supply problem we faced in Russia. Their machines become a burden. They need fuel, ammo, and spare parts. They have moved 400 miles in 30 days. History shows what comes next. Everything stops." German intelligence tracked American supply needs carefully. A Sherman tank got only about half a mile per gallon on roads, even worse off-road. An infantry division required 700 tons of supplies each day. An armored division needed 1,000 tons. Patton had 12 divisions moving forward along a 60-mile front. The numbers looked impossible. 12,000 tons a day carried 400 miles across damaged roads that German forces had wrecked as they retreated. General Major Siegfried Westphal, who would soon become Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, wrote on August 20th that even if the Americans had endless trucks, which they didn't, perfect roads, which didn't exist, and zero breakdowns impossible, they still couldn't keep Patton supplied for more than another 2 days. "Physical laws cannot be broken," he wrote, "not even by American industry." At 2 p.m. on August 25th, 1944, inside a seized French chateau near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres of the Motor Transport Service spoke to a room of doubtful officers. The numbers were brutal. Patton's army was using supplies faster than any force in history, moving at speeds no logistical plan expected. Normal supply systems, railroads, standard convoys, depot distribution, had already collapsed under the pressure. "Gentlemen," Ayres said, "we're going to build a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches straight to the front. Every truck will run 20 hours a day. No stopping except for gas or emergencies. We will move at least 12,500 tons every 24 hours. The name came from railroad slang. A Red Ball shipment meant priority freight that outranked everything else. The Red Ball Express would follow the same rule, absolute priority, no delays. The technical plan broke every German logistical rule. 2 parallel one-way roads, one for loaded trucks heading east, one for empty trucks going back. A 24-hour non-stop system with headlights on, ignoring blackout rules. No stop policy except for fuel or breakdowns. Convoys spaced 5 minutes apart, aiming for a 35 miles per hour average speed. Mobile repair units placed every 50 miles. Military police ordered any truck going under 25 mph off the road. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher of the Advanced Section reviewed the numbers. We need 140 truck companies, at least 5,958 vehicles, running at 90% readiness. No logistical manual says this is possible. But within 36 hours, the impossible was real. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 3,916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks, the Deuce and a Half, loaded with 105mm shells for Patton's artillery near Melun, 300 miles east. The makeup of the Red Ball Express would have shocked German racial thinkers. Of the 23,000 drivers, around 75% were African-American soldiers serving in a still segregated army. These men, who couldn't eat in many white restaurants back home, were supplying the army led by America's most famous general. The drivers quickly formed their own culture. They painted slogans on their trucks: Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express. They set their own rules. Slow trucks pulled over immediately. Broken vehicles were shoved into ditches. Anything under 20 miles per hour was treated as an obstruction. By August 28th, German scouts began reporting something they had never seen before. Recon units from Aufklärung 116 sent messages from positions overlooking the main Red Ball route. A long line of vehicles kept moving, their headlights stretching for 20 kilometers. There was no spacing between trucks and no blackout rules. Scouts estimated nearly 1,000 vehicles passing each hour. It looked like the Americans had thrown out every normal military precaution. Everything about this broke German doctrine. Headlights at night were an open invitation for air attacks. A solid line of trucks made a perfect target for artillery. And without spacing, any broken truck could stop the whole convoy. But the Americans didn't seem worried at all. General Lieutenant Edgar Feuchtinger, commander of the 21st Panzer Division, watched the Red Ball express himself from a hidden spot on August 30th. His message to Army Group B showed how worried he was becoming. The enemy is running a supply system we cannot make sense of. Trucks pass every 30 seconds, day and night. They don't hide, they don't spread out, they don't follow any rules we understand. This isn't normal military planning. It's mass-produced for warfare. What German officers failed to grasp was that American logistics followed a completely different mindset. Where Germans stressed secrecy, Americans depended on sheer volume. Where Germans tried to save vehicles, Americans assumed 20% of them would break down every day and planned around it. Where Germans stuck to strict procedures, Americans constantly improvised. The numbers produced by the Red Ball Express were beyond anything German planners thought possible. In the first week, August 25th to 31st, 1944, it delivered 89,939 tons of supplies, an average of 12,848 tons a day. The round trip was 686 miles. Nearly 6,000 trucks were making roughly 1.5 trips per day. The operation itself burned 300,000 gallons of fuel. When German officers found these numbers in captured American paperwork, they dismissed them as made up. But the stats were real, and they were increasing. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had built a rhythm that amazed German logistics officers who still relied on horse transport for most of their supplies. Convoys left the western end every 5 minutes. Each convoy had around 67 trucks. Most carried 5 tons, though many were overloaded with 7. The 350-mile trip took about 14 hours one way, plus 2 hours to turn around. At any moment, around 5,000 trucks were moving. New ideas and fixes appeared constantly as drivers and mechanics found solutions to problems German planners believe impossible to solve. Around 1,800 trucks broke down every day, but repair teams fixed them on the shoulder. Mechanics created a quick triage method, 15 minutes to repair, or the truck got pushed off the road. They stripped parts from trucks that were beyond saving. Engines were replaced in 45 minutes with mobile cranes. When the main Red Ball route became jammed, drivers made new paths. They took French buses to move people so that more trucks could carry cargo. They seized German vehicles, painted them olive drab, and put them into service. They built detours around destroyed bridges using rubble from bombed towns. Germans watching this strange mix of order and chaos simply couldn't understand it. Their own doctrine emphasized detailed planning, strict maintenance, and careful control. The Americans ignored almost all of that, yet the system got faster instead of breaking down. The biggest shock to German observers was American fuel supply. The Red Ball Express burned 300,000 gallons of fuel every day, more than some entire German armies received. But the Americans never ran out. They had built another enormous project, Operation Pluto, the undersea pipelines running fuel across the English Channel. By September 1944, gasoline was flowing through underwater lines that German intelligence had entirely missed. Fuel storage points sat every 25 miles along the route. Tanker trucks ran their own convoys, so no truck waited more than 10 minutes to refuel. General Major Walter Warlimont, looking at aerial photos, wrote, "The Americans have fuel dumps larger than our entire national reserves. They burn more gasoline moving gasoline than we give to full panzer divisions. This is not war as we know it. This is industrial excess." The Red Ball Express didn't just support Patton, it increased his speed dramatically. German doctrine said armored units could move 20 to 30 miles per day at best. Patton's units, supplied by the Red Ball Express, were doing 40 to 60 miles day after day. On September 1, 1944, the 4th Armored Division moved 35 miles in the morning, refueled at noon. Red Ball trucks were already there, then advanced another 32 miles in the afternoon. That 67-mile advance in one day broke every German assumption, which was based on a maximum of 30 miles. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, reading the reports in East Prussia, refused to believe them at first. No armored force can advance 60 miles a day for a week. Mechanical failures alone would stop it. This is propaganda, but intercepted American radio confirmed it. Even more shocking, the messages weren't coded. The Americans were calling out their locations openly, confident they could move faster than the Germans could respond. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence had gathered a full report on the Red Ball Express. The results were devastating for German planning. Everything they believed about American capability was wrong. The report listed points that went against all German military logic. Americans wasted vehicles freely, leaving broken ones behind. Drivers ran for days on stimulants, ignoring normal rules for rest. There was no camouflage discipline at all. Mechanical breakdowns hit 30% daily, but didn't slow the system because of sheer numbers. Fuel consumption was higher than what Europe's armies could even imagine. Field Marshal Walter Model's reaction showed rising despair. If these reports are correct, we are not fighting a better army but a better civilization. They do not hide because they do not fear us. They waste resources because they have endless resources. We cannot beat this with tactics. But the Red Ball Express also came with a human cost that German observers never saw. Drivers worked 72 hours straight, sometimes hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine pills. Accidents killed around 300 drivers during the operation. Trucks crashed in fog, rolled on damaged roads, or caught fire from overheated engines. Yet morale stayed remarkably high. Most of these men were African American, denied equal treatment at home, but they knew they were part of history. With every mile and every load, they were proving Hitler's racist beliefs wrong. Captured German officers later spoke openly about what the Red Ball Express really meant. Oberst Hans von Luck, captured in September 1944, told his interrogators, "We realized the war was lost once we saw how your supply system worked. You break every rule, burn fuel, ditch vehicles, push drivers past their limits, yet you win simply through overwhelming volume. You've turned war into an industrial process we can't match." The psychological effect on German troops was severe. Every night they heard the constant roar of American trucks. Endless engines, endless supplies. German soldiers had just a few bullets per rifle, while the Americans seemed to have endless ammunition. Even the noise itself felt like a weapon. The trucks amazed German engineers too. The GMC CCKW 2.5-ton truck, the heart of the Red Ball Express, was a mass-produced machine that worked flawlessly. General Motors built more than 500,000 of them by the end of the war, more than all the trucks in the entire German army combined. They had features Germans didn't adopt: standard all-wheel drive, automatic tire inflation, waterproofing that let them drive through 30 inches of water, engines that ran on low-quality gasoline, and heaters that actually worked. Even more shocking was America's approach to repairs. Germans rebuilt engines. Americans just swapped them out. Germans rationed every spare part. Americans junked whole trucks for small issues. Germans relied on expert mechanics. Americans had thousands of trained mechanics who could handle nearly anything quickly. As the front moved east, the Red Ball Express adjusted instantly, much faster than anything the Germans could imagine. When the main route toward Chartres became too slow, new branches appeared almost overnight. The White Ball Express from Rouen to Paris, the Green Diamond from Cherbourg to the rail hubs, the Red Lion from Bayeux to Brussels, and the ABC route from Antwerp to Brussels and Charleroi. German officers needed weeks to plan such changes. The Americans simply painted new road signs, assigned trucks, and started moving. The large number of African-American drivers stunned Nazi racial thinkers. German ideology claimed black people were inferior, unable to handle technical work or show initiative. Yet there were thousands of African-American drivers running a logistics system that German forces could not even understand, let alone match. These soldiers recognized the irony and drove with pride. Every mile proved Nazi ideas wrong. Some German prisoners who were assigned to load Red Ball trucks found their beliefs completely shaken. They saw African-American sergeants calculating weights faster than German engineers, speaking better English than German teachers, and treating prisoners with fairness despite what Nazi propaganda had said. The Red Ball Express needed infrastructure that Germans assumed was impossible to build during active combat. American engineers built or reinforced 40 bridges, set up 15 major fuel depots, created 26 repair stations, and built 8 temporary housing areas for drivers, all while the route was running at full speed. Germans had blown up the bridge at Mantes, expecting it to take 6 weeks to replace. American engineers built a working temporary bridge in just 14 hours, and convoys only had to detour 8 miles on rough bypass roads. German engineers watched in disbelief. There were no long planning meetings, no detailed blueprints, just immediate action. The Americans built faster than the Germans could destroy. Roads and structures seemed to appear overnight in fields and small towns. One achievement shocked German artillery officers more than anything: the rate of ammunition resupply. American artillery fired without limits, something German units hadn't been able to do since 1942. During the attacks on Metz in September 1944, U.S. artillery fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every shell with an extra 20% on top. German guns around Metz were restricted to 50 rounds per gun per day. The difference was overwhelming. American guns fired nonstop while German officers calculated that such barges required 50 truckloads of ammunition per hour, yet the Red Ball delivered it easily. The Red Ball Express burned through vehicles at a rate that would have crippled any other army. By late September, the numbers were huge. Trucks lasted around 10,000 miles instead of the usual 30,000. Every day, about 30% of vehicles were out of service. Mechanics replaced around 500 engines each week. Drivers went through 10,000 tires weekly. More than 5,000 trucks were destroyed or abandoned. But the system never slowed. U.S. factories had planned for these losses. Shipments of new trucks arrived every week. New drivers were trained in 2 days and sent straight to work. German analysts concluded that the Americans were losing more trucks per week than Germany even had in France, yet the Americans' capacity kept growing. They had done something Germany thought impossible. They built a supply system that moved faster than it wore out. French civilians along the Red Ball route saw American abundance with their own eyes. After years of German occupation and rationing, the sight of endless trucks and supplies felt like a miracle. African-American drivers, especially, often shared food with civilians: chocolate, cigarettes, soap, despite rules against it. Children gathered at every stop, and the drivers always gave something away. The difference from German occupation was obvious. Americans casually handed out items that Germans had guarded tightly. German intelligence officers reported the effect. French civilians now believe American victory is certain. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased fourfold along the Red Ball routes. Areas once passive now openly oppose us. In early September 1944, the Red Ball Express hit its hardest challenge. Patton's army had moved so far forward that even the massive supply line struggled to keep up. The round trip had grown to more than 700 miles. Drivers were collapsing from exhaustion, trucks were falling apart, and German intelligence believed this was the long-awaited collapse. General der Panzertruppe Asso von Manschufel reported on September 8, American supply lines show signs of failing. Convoy intervals have slowed from 5 minutes to 15. Truck speed has dropped. This is our chance. But once again, American adaptability shocked them. Within 3 days, the Red Ball Express reorganized completely. New transfer points cut long trips into shorter legs. Drivers rotated more often. Forward repair bases opened. The number of trucks doubled. By September 12th, the supply totals were actually higher than before. What should have stopped Patton ended up strengthening the system. Alongside the Red Ball Express, the Americans added another supply method the Germans believed was impossible: large-scale air delivery. C-47 transport planes started dropping supplies straight to frontline troops, each carrying about 3 tons. On September 16, 1944, German observers counted 900 transport flights in one day, 2,700 tons delivered by air. The Luftwaffe, at its best, had barely managed 300 tons per day at Stalingrad and considered that a maximum effort. The Americans treated transport aircraft like flying trucks, took losses as expected, and overwhelmed every problem with sheer numbers. The German army simply couldn't keep up with the scale of American logistics. The Red Ball Express ran in a way that broke every rule of German military structure. Low-ranking American officers were allowed to make decisions that only high-ranking German officers could make. Sergeants managed jobs that German colonels would normally oversee. This freedom confused German observers. To them, it looked like American supply lines had no clear chain of command. Every lieutenant acted like a general, and sergeants behaved like senior officers. By German standards, this should have ended in total chaos. Instead, it worked smoothly, and the Germans had no way to match it with their strict hierarchy. By October 1944, railways started catching up to the advancing American armies, reducing the pressure on the Red Ball Express. What was meant to be a 10-day mission had run for 82 straight days and delivered more than 412,000 tons of supplies, covering 122 million ton-miles. German officers fighting near their own borders finally understood what they were facing. Field Marshal Model wrote in his last report, "It wasn't American tanks or planes that beat us. It was their truck." The switch to rail transport was another incredible achievement. While the Red Ball was still running, American railroad crews fixed over 1,000 miles of wrecked French tracks. They built new lines faster than German forces could destroy them, sometimes even using captured German equipment. The final numbers from the Red Ball Express shocked every German analyst. 82 days of nonstop work, more than 412,000 tons moved, over 220 million ton-miles covered, an average of nearly 6,000 trucks on the road each day, sometimes rising to 7,000. More than 23,000 drivers were involved. They burned through 700,000 gallons of fuel every day, delivered 40,000 tons of ammunition to Patton alone, shipped 15 million rations, and transported 135,000 tons of medical supplies. After the war, captured German officers admitted they had completely misunderstood the scale of American industry. They based their estimates on European standards. They assumed Americans could only do 3 times better than Europe's best. But the Americans operated at a level 10 times higher than that. The Red Ball Express didn't just move supplies. It broke the German belief in their own military superiority. German officers who once called Americans soft watched them perform supply miracles through raw determination and massive industrial power. German POWs would stand silently at the camp fences watching Red Ball trucks drive by, one after another. Some even cried. They understood what they were seeing, not just that Americans could supply their armies, but that they could throw away more equipment than Germany could produce. Each passing truck was a reminder that their entire worldview was collapsing. The Red Ball Express also exposed a huge contradiction inside the American military. Most of the drivers were African-American soldiers, men who were still segregated, denied equal treatment, and kept out of combat jobs. When General Eisenhower visited the operation in September 1944, he saw the inequality up close. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, wrote, "The general watched black drivers who had been working for 20 hours straight. He said, 'These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry unit.' We have a lot to rethink." Their performance put new pressure on the military to integrate, which eventually helped lead to desegregation 3 years later. African-American troops proved in France what they had always known: they could match anyone when given the chance. The Red Ball Express was their battlefield, and they excelled. German racial theorists didn't know how to explain this. Publications that once pushed Nazi racial science stopped talking about American logistics. They couldn't deny what African American drivers had accomplished. After the war, German military engineers studied the Red Ball Express in detail. It changed how armies around the world thought about supply systems. They learned that massive volume can overcome inefficiency. Extra equipment removes weaknesses, giving authority to lower ranks increases speed, standard parts multiply efficiency, and people can endure far more than most commanders assume. General Franz Halder wrote in 1950, "The Red Ball Express showed that logistics shapes strategy." The Americans understood this. We realized it too late. Among the 23,000 Red Ball drivers, there were countless acts of bravery that Germans found hard to understand. These stories came directly from military records. Corporal John L. Houston drove for 48 hours straight to deliver ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division at Cambrai. He fell asleep at the wheel 3 times and was woken up by other drivers before continuing on. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire when the brakes overheated while he was hauling medical supplies. Instead of jumping out like the rules required, he stayed behind the wheel and drove the burning truck 2 miles to a field hospital, leaping out just as the flames reached the cab. Those supplies ended up saving wounded soldiers on both sides. Stories like these showed the Germans something about American military culture, how much it relied on personal initiative, calculated risks, and getting the mission done rather than strictly following every rule. In a desperate attempt to copy the Red Ball Express, the Germans tried to build their own version during the Battle of the Bulge in late 1944. They planned to use captured American trucks for a new German supply route. But the effort failed immediately. German drivers couldn't keep up the speed Americans used. Their mechanics couldn't repair American vehicles fast enough. They didn't have enough fuel to support the heavy consumption. And most of all, they couldn't copy the American mindset of having unlimited equipment. The officer in charge reported, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were broken down. Americans would have replaced them. We tried to fix them." That difference explains our defeat. The winter of 1944-45 became the Red Ball Express's ultimate trial. Ice, snow, and freezing temperatures should have shut the whole operation down. German manuals said wheeled supply lines couldn't function below -10 degrees Celsius. But the Red Ball kept going. Drivers chained their tires, poured alcohol into their radiators, and pushed on. Speeds dropped from 35 to 15 miles per hour, but the supplies continued to move. German units reported seeing long lines of American trucks fighting through blizzards that had stopped German armor divisions. The Americans had built a supply system that worked no matter the weather, the terrain, or the enemy. It wasn't neat or fuel efficient by German standards, but it couldn't be stopped. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were ordered to study the Red Ball Express for historical documentation. Their final assessment was unanimous and humbling. General Friedrich Schultz summed it up: "The Red Ball Express represents a kind of warfare we never imagined. The Americans built a temporary world, thousands of men, thousands of trucks, and millions of tons of supplies that existed only to support their armies, then disappeared when no longer needed. We spent years building permanent systems. They built better temporary ones in days." Some of the most revealing comments about the Red Ball Express came from General Oskar Hiderian, one of the creators of German armored warfare. He admitted that Germany invented blitzkrieg, but never solved its biggest weakness, supplies. He said Americans solved it through an industrial scale of production the Germans thought no nation could reach. To him, the Red Ball Express wasn't just a supply line. It was a non-stop flood of equipment that washed the German army away. Running the Red Ball Express cost the United States around $100 million in 1944. That included the trucks that broke down, fuel burned, road damage, and payments to French civilians. German officers, who were used to rationing everything down to the last bullet, couldn't wrap their heads around a number that large. But Americans saw it as a bargain. The operation helped capture 400,000 German soldiers, freed France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and cut the war short by about 6 months. Since every day of war cost the U.S. $250 million, the Red Ball Express basically paid for itself in a single day of time saved. Lieutenant General John C.H. Lee, who oversaw logistics in Europe, put it bluntly: "We burned out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any earlier war, that would be a disaster. In an American industrial war, it's just part of the cost." One thing nobody expected was how much the Red Ball Express shaped post-war American trucking. Thousands of drivers came home with experience running the largest supply network in the world. Many of them went on to start major trucking companies, helped design the interstate highway system, and built the foundation of modern U.S. transportation. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were started by Red Ball veterans who brought military logistics ideas into everyday business. They had learned in France that moving large amounts fast was better than being perfectly efficient, and that a 24-hour operation could move almost anything. Military historians today agree that the Red Ball Express was the most important logistics effort in the European campaign. Without it, Patton's army would have stalled, Paris would have been freed much later, and German forces would have had time to build strong winter defenses. The operation proved the American belief that logistics matters more than fancy tactics. German officers spent years studying Clausewitz and battlefield strategy. Americans studied factory production, supply schedules, and railroad timetables. The Red Ball Express made it clear that in modern war, the side that can keep its soldiers supplied wins. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Germany's top commander in the West, received a full intelligence report on the Red Ball Express. After reading for hours, he called his staff together and said, "We are facing something we cannot solve militarily. The Americans built a supply system that removes the limits of distance. Our entire strategy depends on their forces outrunning their supplies. But that point doesn't exist. They have changed warfare. We are fighting the last war." When his operations officers suggested using the Luftwaffe to attack the Red Ball routes, von Rundstedt responded, "With what planes? They have 6,000 trucks. Even if we destroyed 1,000, which we can't, they would replace them in a week. We would need to destroy 200 trucks every day just to keep up. We don't have 200 aircraft in total." Behind all the huge numbers were real people whose stories shocked German observers. There were drivers who had gone 3 days without sleep but refused to take a break because their trucks might not finish the trip without them. Mechanics worked in freezing rain all night to keep convoys moving. Teenagers lied about their age so they could join the driving ranks. Stories like these spread across the front lines and helped build a reputation that made German soldiers feel hopeless. American troops were nothing like the soft, stereotyped German propaganda had claimed. They worked themselves harder than German troops pushed their horses, and the Americans did it willingly. This made them far more dangerous than German officers expected. The Red Ball Express accidentally became one of the most powerful psychological weapons of the war. German troops could hear the trucks through the night, an endless buzz of engines that never stopped. Just the sound weakened German morale. Some units even reported hearing ghost convoys, phantom noises caused by stress and fear. The simple fact that Americans always had more supplies, while Germans rationed their last bullets, broke German confidence. American psychological warfare teams noticed this effect. When no convoys were nearby, they played recordings of truck engines toward German positions. German soldiers reported these fake convoys as real, showing how deeply the Red Ball Express affected their morale. By November 1944, with the railroads repaired, the Red Ball Express officially ended. But its methods permanently changed how the U.S. military moved supplies. The idea of constant, high-volume, even wasteful, but extremely effective resupply became standard American doctrine. One final surprise came at the end, how quickly the operation was taken apart. The huge system, 23,000 men, 6,000 vehicles, many depots and stations, disappeared in just 72 hours. Troops were reassigned, trucks moved to other units, and roads returned to civilian use. Germany needed months to set up smaller operations and years to shut them down. Americans built what they needed, used it, threw it away, and then built something better. When German generals surrendered in May 1945, many mentioned the Red Ball Express as the main reason they had no hope left. General Haas von Manteuffel said during questioning, "Once we understood your supply abilities, we knew the war was over. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them." The Red Ball Express was a weapon we had no answer for. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, one of Germany's most respected commanders, was asked what shocked him most about American forces. His reply was simple: "Not your tanks, not your planes, your trucks." The Red Ball Express showed that your entire society had turned into a war machine. We were fighting your factories, not just your soldiers. The final numbers of the Red Ball Express show exactly what he meant. Total cargo moved 412,193 tons. Total distance traveled 122 million ton-miles. Average trucks used daily 5,958, with peaks of 7,000. Drivers involved 23,000. Total operating days 82. Fuel used 57 million gallons. Tires worn out 180,000. Vehicles lost more than 5,000. Total cost $100 million. German divisions defeated through supply advantage 47. Estimated time cut from the war 180 days. These numbers tell a story far bigger than a supply mission. They show the moment when war changed forever, when factories mattered more than battlefield genius, when logistics shaped strategy instead of simply supporting it, and when American industry became the decisive weapon of the war. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the United States Postal Service released a special stamp honoring the Red Ball Express at the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. The ceremony highlighted an operation that had often been overlooked in history, overshadowed by combat, but which had been just as important for the Allied victory. Veterans who attended spoke with pride about their role in the mission. They had shown that American industry and personal determination could overcome any obstacle. They drove through exhaustion, mechanical problems, and harsh weather that could stop tanks in their tracks. Most of these drivers were black soldiers, segregated, discriminated against, and often denied recognition during the war. But they still delivered victory, moving supplies at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved that in modern war, logistics is not just support. It can be the main effort. The operation showed that a democratic nation could mobilize resources on a scale that even totalitarian systems could not match. German commanders who had laughed at American supply efforts were silenced as 6,000 trucks carried 12,500 tons of supplies daily across 700 miles of liberated France. The Germans expected Americans to follow European-style caution, conserving resources and advancing slowly. Instead, the Americans created a flood of logistics that overwhelmed German forces. Success didn't come from brilliant tactics, but from traits the Germans couldn't understand: industrial abundance, mechanical skill, the ability to improvise, and most importantly, soldiers taking initiative without waiting for orders. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army depended on the Red Ball Express, wrote in his memoirs, "The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserve as much credit for defeating Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, mechanical failures, and weather that could stop armor. Without them, the Third Army could not move. Without movement, we don't win." They were mostly black soldiers, segregated and overlooked, yet they won the war as surely as any rifleman. History must record this truth. That truth is the lasting legacy of the Red Ball Express. 23,000 mostly African-American drivers operating 6,000 trucks on a single highway achieved what German planners said was impossible. They supplied advancing armies faster than physics seemed to allow, kept the pace beyond human endurance, and proved that in modern war, the side with more trucks often beats the side with the best tactics. German generals had mocked American logistics as wasteful and unsustainable. 82 days later, those same generals surrendered to armies supplied by the Red Ball Express. They finally understood that American trucks had beaten German tanks, that industrial might had overpowered military skill, and that logistics had become a strategy. The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944, but its influence lasted. It showed that in the industrial age, victory belongs not to the bravest soldiers or smartest generals, but to the nation that can move the most supplies, the fastest and the farthest. German generals who had mocked American logistics in August 1944 signed surrender papers in May 1945, defeated by 23,000 truck drivers moving at 35 miles per hour. Their story belongs among the greatest military operations in history. Not because it was neat or efficient, it wasn't, but because it worked. The Red Ball Express kept armies moving, kept Germans retreating, and showed that in modern war, convoys of trucks matter more than columns of tanks. The roads of France still bear the marks of the Red Ball Express: ruts from overloaded trucks, hastily repaired bridges, and abandoned vehicles along the sides. But the true monument is the speed of Allied victory. Every day, the war ended sooner, saving thousands of lives, and the Red Ball Express shortened it by months. In the end, the German generals learned the hardest lesson of modern war. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics, and Americans talk trucks. The Red Ball Express was America speaking very loudly, with 6,000 engines roaring down a one-way road, carrying both freedom and destruction at 35 miles per hour. The last word comes from a German officer whose name was lost to history, quoted by a Red Ball driver at the 1994 ceremony. Watching the endless convoy in Belgium, he said to his captives, "We prepared for everything, your tanks, planes, and ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy with more trucks than soldiers?" The answer passed him every 5 minutes, in the tired hands of Americans rewriting the rules of war, one delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express turned logistics into strategy, supply into victory, and trucks into the most important weapon of the European war. German generals stopped laughing only when they realized this, but by then, Patton was already at their gates, supplied by the greatest logistics operation in history.